The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar in the ISCDO series, supporting data leaders in their delivery. Today, we're going to have Barbara Nichols talking about how to make data governance useful, a topic that should be at the center of all that we do, given that we are asked to implement data governance often in cultures where it's seen as an encumbrance and not a use, and people work against it. And so finding ways to make data governance useful should be something that we're all after. And just what I'm saying, the ISCDO welcomes everybody. We will have some big news about a new direction that we're going in the next couple of months, and we hope that you will follow us there and think about joining us. But let's introduce Barbara before we start. So our speaker today, Barbara, has a long history, obviously, for such a young lady, in data governance and information technology. And she is a presenter that I have seen in conferences across the States in topics of data governance. You can read that, what it is. And she provides us with a background and a level of knowledge and understanding in how to make data governance useful. That should, I hope, bring forward questions which we will deal with at the end, but should leave us all in a better position to do our jobs when the hour finishes today. Robert, if you can change over to Barbara, and Barbara, welcome today. I'm really pleased that you're joining us, and I very much look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, no.
Not yet, so I need to do the sharing.
Yes, that's the one.
A minute.
There, we're good.
You are?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So thank you so much for that nice introduction. And I am usually coming to you from a town north of Boston, Massachusetts. Today I'm actually in New York. And I'm really pleased to be able to speak with you today. It's going to be a quick and hopefully impactful presentation. And you'll notice that in the bottom corner, I have a logo for my company, Meta360. And what I'm going to be doing with you today is what I do for a living, among many other things, to support the advancement of data as a strategic asset for my clients. And it's also my great passion. And I've been fortunate to be working in this field since the 1980s. And the very last slide of the presentation, I'll be sharing a slide with my contact information for anyone who wants to stay in contact with me. So if you are so moved, please do that. All right. So as we know, technology moves very quickly, and some of these words are undoubtedly familiar to you. And some of the technologies that were in the labs in the 1970s, like AI and machine learning, have now matured and are incorporated into commercial products. And as wonderful as the many advancements in technology are, we are still left with the fundamental questions. The first question is, what are we really talking about? So in order to conduct business, we really do need to know what we're talking about in order to communicate effectively. So for example, in one division is a client the same as a customer, and why or why not? And what about a part and a product? Are they the same? An account? Is a passcode the same as a password? You know, and where do we start? There's so much data that we can't tackle it all at once. So where do we start? And then how do we leverage the work we're doing so that people can find it? And how do we keep going? You know, what do we do to continue to keep it going until all the important data is well known and understood? So, well, I tried to advance my slide. There we go. So data governance may require all of the things that you see on this slide as it matures. However, it's most important to deliver business value quickly and consistently over time in order to be valued and supported. And it's functions that are valued that get the attention and the budget that they need. So you want to be in that category. And here are some suggestions about how not to start and maybe what we should be doing instead. So one of the most difficult things, and where a lot of people start, is they try to get company-wide buy-in before they really get down to the business of defining and using data as a standard. I would suggest that instead choose a sponsor, and small is fine. That you should select a burning business problem, solve it for a place in a business, and advertise that widely. You also can spend a lot of time developing mission, goals, policy, procedures, and standards before you focus on the actual data. And I would suggest that they are going to come up as you need them as problems are solved. So when you find that you need a policy, you can put it into that workflow. If you need a standard, you can put it into that workflow. And the sponsorship for your work is going to grow with success. And out of strategy sessions, corporate-wide usually, you've heard of, maybe it's out of fashion now, but BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. Well, a lot of people would call that, you know, boiling the ocean. We have to break these things down so that we can show early business results and leverage quick wins. And as we're doing that, we are building the essential infrastructure that's needed for data governance. The people that are the business owners, the data stewards, the subject matter experts, the policies, the procedures, and the standards, they will all come along as you're doing the work. So there are 3 essential steps that we're going to be covering today as a way to make data governance really matter in your organization. And the first one is to select. We are going to choose critical data elements. That's a way to get started. Then we're going to define them, providing the key metadata that is required so that people clearly understand what data is, what it isn't, and how to use it. And then you have done a lot of work to get to that point. So you want to leverage what you've done by getting the greatest return on that investment. So how do we leverage the hard work of building standard data definitions and making them available to the organization? So let's dive in. Let's take a look at critical data elements. Also, I'm using key data elements and KPIs as synonyms, you know, at this point for critical data elements. And these are elements that have this material impact on your organization's business operations, their decision-making, and other data definitions. There might be a piece of data that's critical to the calculation of another critical piece of data. Your data and your organization, they depend heavily on this data for its survival, which is usually market growth, profitability, status in the marketplace, your credibility in terms of being able to comply with regulations. As one company I did work for said, we never want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for the wrong reasons. And that's a pretty good slogan to live by in most companies. So recognizing the fact too that not all of your data elements are of equal importance, and that your critical data elements can and do vary by industry. So let's look at some other factors that influence the selection of critical data elements. Because all data is not created equal, you want to look at the data that has direct or indirect financial impact to your business, or where you are at risk. What if your trade secrets got out to your competitors? Or there have been great steps taken in the area around privacy, financial checks and balances, and these influence the selection of critical data elements. Seen a lot of regulatory requirements, especially for banks, investment services, anybody that's licensed by the SEC, and insurance companies, as well as normal government reporting for any public company. There are some other guide rails that we can use, low-hanging fruit, but low-hanging but important fruit that might be known as a business problem. Identifiers of the key things that your company cares about. So for example, customers, products, cost centers, and the key attributes of those things. For example, if you choose person or customer, they're going to have an identifier. They're going to have a last name, a given name, birth date, address, and social security number if it's a person of interest. So I have a question mark next to the social security number because we're going to come back to that as a special kind of data name that we want to deviate perhaps from our standards in order to accommodate. Looking at measures, how do you measure success in the company? How do you ensure privacy and regulatory requirements are being met? And then there are always targets for quality improvement because A, it's always been a problem, or B, you know, now it's affecting our customer satisfaction and we have to deal with it. So there are methodologies that you can use for selecting your critical data elements. There are some people who use a questionnaire to aid assessment and classification. So, you know, is this data element currently highlighted? You can read those for yourself. But those are examples of things that might be on a questionnaire to assess whether this is a critical piece of data for your company. There's also something called the Likert scale, where you describe the impact that this data would have should it be corrupted or accessed without authorization or deleted by accident or intention. And that's a rating scale that, you know, obviously going from no impact to high impact, you choose your high impact data as your critical data. But I think the most important thing to remember is that you need some kind of a repeatable method for selection, because this isn't one and done. You really need to perform a periodic review of how do you prioritize the data that you're going to be working on, and how do you validate that the information in the definitions are still it's complete and it's accurate. Nothing has changed. So let's take a look at how data governance relates to critical data elements and how we progress and connect these together. So first, a definition, just data governance. Pretty good, concise definition, has a lot of pieces to it. You know, you need the policies, the processes, guidelines, rules, standards, etc., and any accountabilities to manage data as a strategic enterprise asset. And as a general sort of definition for data governance, you could substitute, financial governance. It's the same kind of thing, that you need the accountabilities in place to manage your money as a strategic enterprise asset. The big difference about data and other assets like money is that you can use data without using it up. And that is typically what accounts for all of the varying flavors of a single piece of data that may exist in your organization. People say, oh, we have no shortage of data. In fact, we have so much, and I'll just tweak this particular data so that it meets my need. And now you have two different definitions potentially of customer or product. And identifying the critical data elements is a data governance practice that really allows you to prioritize your tasks and your goals more accurately. And the identification of CDEs must include involvement from the organization's data stewards and subject matter experts. These people are not found in the information technology support of your organization. You need the people who are the subject matter experts, stewards of the data from the business perspective. So this is an introduction of some roles and responsibilities that you'll be developing as you do your first pass on your critical data elements. Who owns this definition? Who do I go to if I see a problem with the data? Things like that. So this is how they connect together. And in the next slide, I'm going to give an example because it's sort of where I started my career in data management. Many of you may, if you're above the age of 50 at least, have heard of Digital Equipment Corporation, which was called DEC. It was an American international company in the computer industry from the 60s to the 90s. You may remember VAX systems or VMS operating systems. And in the 1980s, digital was doing very, very well, profitable, making money in spite of the fact that there was little direction from the top, no single identified strategic direction, many product lines of business, manufactured products, components, services, and training. And it was a company that was so vast and diversified that no big ticket issue jumped out at us, except not to repeat the experience of the order number. The order number was a data field that appeared on probably every piece of paper, invoices, orders, you name it. And there was a big problem. And in the 1976, 1977 area, they were running out of order numbers. This is not a good thing. What they found, though, is that it was so pervasive and so differently named and described all throughout the systems of the company that it took 2 years and $2 million in 1977 dollars to expand the order number from 5 to 9 characters. And this is when the company said, we really need to get a handle on our data. And they founded the data management program to bring that function into the company. I was one of 2 people in the data management program as it started. And it's amazing, but in 1983, we had 100,000 employees worldwide and not a single data standard, which is amazing. And we were also setting up a new company function that had not existed before. So we started by choosing 12 critical data elements. And given the lack of certain business direction, we took the identifiers for critical corporate entities, those things that almost every corporation cares about. their employees, customers, products, cost centers, company locations. Digital was everywhere, especially in Massachusetts. You could throw a rock and hit a digital building. And what we learned from diving into these was quite amazing. So we, for example, the employees all had badge numbers. However, we were often amazed when someone from another facility, let's say Puerto Rico, would come to the United States and they would have the same badge number as somebody who was like one of the first 100 employees in the company. And what we learned was nobody in a plant that had 200 employees wanted a 6-digit corporate badge number. So they had their own set of local identifying badge numbers, and that ran their payroll and everything else. They had a corporate badge number, but almost nobody knew what it was in those smaller places. Looking at customers, how do you know who owns who when customers are, companies are buying each other, merging, acquisitions happen? How do we consolidate that? The frightening part that really was an impetus for starting the program was the fact that the next identifier after order number that was going to need to change was the product ID. It was a 252 bill of materials structure, and it needed to expand to 13 characters. And they didn't want to go through what, the huge pains of what we went through with the order number. Looking at a stock room may have started out as a room in a building, but it really wasn't a room anymore. It's a cost center. It was a place to gather products that fit in a particular financial category, and the stock room could have been a trailer in a parking lot, plus a couple of other rooms in different facilities. We established in the real estate department, they owned the definition and the assignment of codes to all of our building locations, one source. And orders, we learned, were quite different from a customer perspective versus a manufacturing perspective versus a shipping perspective. Groups of orders might be shipped together simply because geographically they were in a similar region. So we learned a lot, and we just started with these 12, and from that we grew the data management function in this very large company. So the importance of identifying your critical data elements are these: that you are able to set reasonable expectations about data governance, what it's going to take and how quickly it can happen. To communicate that it's a journey of cultural transformation. It's not a project. Projects have beginning and end dates. Just like financial governance, data governance never stops. And it's a way to concentrate your resources to affect the business benefit on your highest worth data. And it positions you for quick wins. It accelerates your credibility as a data governance professional, and organizational buy-in happens as business problems are getting solved and understood for the first time sometimes. And why do you want that to happen? Because you need to get funded. I always at conferences see a presentation about, can you explain, how do I explain the return on my investment to my sponsors? Well, that will become very evident with your successes. You can track your governance adoption over time, and it helps drive the level of priority for establishing the standards, data quality rules, and all the other pieces of infrastructure that you need to have data governance work within your company and be worthwhile within your company. So let's look at what we're going to do with these critical data elements once they've been selected. The first thing we're going to do is to define them. And what you're really doing when you define and name your critical data elements is you are building the corporate vocabulary. And that's an important thing to do. Why? Because you need a standard way to define and name things so that you achieve a business and information systems environment where data is understandable, meaningful, and unambiguous. You can detect the potential for shared data usage. You get better administration and control, and you can determine the impact of change through the use of standard names in programs. By querying your metadata repositories, it would have been so much easier at DEC if we had been able to say, show me all the places everywhere where an order number is being used. We had no way of doing that. And the biggest reason of why you need this standard data definition and naming practice is because these are your critical data elements. These are the ones you really have to pay attention to. So you've gathered them, be they the 12 that we started with digital or 40 that you're going to start with. Now what? Now you start to hunt and gather. You build your team. You might have someone from the program office assigned as a project manager. You need to identify, even temporarily, who are the data stewards for this area of the business, the subject matter experts. And yes, the technical people may have tremendous information about how data is implemented, but they don't own the business definition. And then you go and find the sources of definitions in your organization for a particular critical data element. So you start with what you have. You might have data dictionaries, or more likely spreadsheets or requirements documents, and maybe you even have data models. So we're going to start to look at how to consolidate and document standards for particular critical data elements. So here's an example. Let's say that our critical data element is the market segmentation code. And you go searching for things that could be or masquerading as a market segmentation code. And these are names that came up in various data dictionaries or spreadsheets that, as you can see, they bear some resemblance to market segmentation code, and they might match what I'm looking for. So given that this is what I'm working with, I can now, unfortunately, display the actual definitions, or descriptions rather, that came from several metadatabases around the company. I unfortunately did not have to make these up, and you can read them, and pretty much they're clear as mud. The local unit assigned SIC code, well, that's not defined. It's a standard industrial classification. I don't know what USCP defined financial reporting segment is, and it's just not really clear. And then it tells us something about, how this is implemented. The next one was jeweler, auto, etc. The next description was what industry the company or customer rather resides in. The next one, SIC code based. How very helpful. Infosys or other tagged industry data. So they're referencing the system that maybe contains this market segmentation code. And the last one, I'm not sure is even complete English. Each customer assigned primary category. However, System X stores this at the ad level for better detail. So when you look at these and try to, match them to a business name, it's like, this is not easy. So I'm going to take a look with you at the kind of metadata we want to collect, and then we're going to focus on two particular aspects of metadata. So this is a picture of a repository data model. So this could be inside your data modeling tool. It could be a metadata repository that you get with an ETL, extract, transform, and load tool. It could be a separate metadata repository that you have purchased. And there is some metadata of all of this metadata that we want to begin to capture for our critical data elements. So when we look at this picture, we see on this side, these highlighted areas are talking about the business metadata. What's the business name? What is the business description? Who owns this from a business perspective? What kinds of related names might there be? And then the connection that's important in the metadata repository is to be able to tie it to where these things are implemented. So a business entity, will end up being a particular table, for example, in a database. Our business attributes probably become columns in that database. So there's a connection between the business and the implementation that's very important. We are going to focus right now on business attributes that we're calling critical data elements, and we're going to focus on the business description and the business name. Okay, so let us go and do that. So the procedure, we're going to build the corporate vocabulary by establishing a standard description, establishing standard business name, deriving the repository name or implementation name. And then the last part, which we won't be going over, is what do you do if your implementation database, for example, has very, very restrictive naming and no ability maybe to carry a description. So there are some things you might have to do. So the first thing we're going to do is establish a standard description. And I'm going to be blitzing through this, touching on each of the first three components of the procedure. But what I have in the presentation is a bunch of hidden slides that I'm not presenting today, but will be available to you. The slides are all going to be made available to anybody who requests them. And those hidden slides that go into more detail that you see under the ovals will be there. But we're going to do it much more briefly given the constraints we have on time. So establish a standard description. The first thing we need is some kind of a starting description. And I just took one from a course that I teach on doing the standard description and naming. So here's the example. If Form 1423G is not paid for by this date, then it can't be discounted. And I think that you would agree that this is not an ideal description. Does anybody know what this form is? And it's something that gets paid, and there's a date involved, and there's some kind of a discount involved, but it's really not a very complete description. So after interviewing the data owner, the business steward, the subject matter experts, and the IT people, you end up coming up with a description that you will continue to evolve, but one that starts off as being very clear, concise, describes what this is, and sometimes it describes what it is not, just to make it very clear as to what it is. So we have developed this description through our interviewing process and our reclamation process of all the data being where it is. And we come up with the calendar date by which the full payment of a customer invoice, I guess that's what 1423G is, must be received by the accounts receivable department in order for the customer to qualify for a discount on that invoice. The invoice is an invoice to our customers. And that's differentiating from vendor invoices that we might have to pay, for example. So asking ourselves the questions, does this description make sense? Does it distinguish it from all other data elements? And do you understand it? We do not want to describe something as who uses it, where is it, why do we have it necessarily. We want to describe what it is. And it's amazing to me how descriptions can go on for quite a while talking about all those other things and never getting to really, what is this thing? So the next thing we're going to do is establish a standard business name. And when we do that from the description, we work backwards. So the first word we're looking for in the name is the last word of the name. It's called the value type, sometimes called an object type. And the question is, what kind of data does this data element contain? And a one-word answer is your value type. And here are some guidelines about how to use certain value types, amount for money. Don't use number if you can avoid it, because that implies how something might be implemented, but it's not necessarily a number. What if your badge number has alphabetic characters in it? It's not really a number anymore, but that's part of the definition. There's some synonyms: type, class, and category, indicators, switch flags. Those are the binary things: yes, no, on, off, 0, 1. So we're going to work backwards when we do this, and the company will begin to put together a value type list. So here are all these words that are legitimate value types, and this grows over time. The first time you come into a data element that is a ratio, and if you don't have that as a value type, you're going to add it with its short and long keyword abbreviations and its description, so you know what you're talking about. And so here's our description that we like, and we're going to identify the value type. And I think you can tell that in the first few words, the value type leaps out at us. It's a calendar date by which the full payment, blah, 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 blah. So I think we can probably all agree that it's a date. Then you keep going. You identify the value type, which has been described as date, and then you keep asking yourself, date of or for what? And a lot of people in the course say, well, it's the discount date. And then you have to really read it and say, is it really the discount date, or is it the date on which something happens to the discount? And then you go, oh, that's right, the discount goes away. So maybe it's an expiration date. Expiration of what? And it's right there in our description. And if it isn't, you need to add it. Expiration of the discount that's on an invoice. So date of expiration, expiration of a discount, discount of an invoice of one of our customers. And you keep going until you come up with your company name. So customer of whom? Customer of company XYZ. Then you might say, well, are there any words that may not, be completely necessary? So if we decide that what we mean by invoice is that it's always a customer, our invoice to our customers, maybe we can eliminate the word customer and we end up with an invoice, full payment, discount, expiration date. And then we're going to derive the repository name or an abbreviated name, because typically you don't put a long business name into a column name in a table, but you do want standards. So we're going to derive the repository name, and all of the words that appear in names build your keyword glossary. These are all keywords. You know, let's take expiration. We want to know what that means, and if we want to query the system and the repository and say, show me all the things that have expiration dates, you may get a whole host of data that will be interesting for you to look at. There are guidelines for abbreviating. You probably know them. Sometimes there are standard, so like the common abbreviation for date is DT. You just use that. For things that are 4 characters or under, sometimes you just use the word. And typically short is sweet, so don't make them big and long. So invoice, full, payment, discount, expiration, date. So that's what we're going to end up with as our repository name, or our abbreviated name. So reviewing the procedure, the first thing we do is establish a standard description. The second thing we do is derive the name from the description. This helps you to avoid lovely data element definitions that start out with saying part type, and the description is the type of part. These are not good descriptions and names. They're too ambiguous. And from then you derive the repository name. And at this point, I want to revisit Social Security number, because it's a type of data that Social Security number is a very common term. If you ask 10 people what it is, they'd know. But what is it really? It is a number. It's not a number of security, and it's not security of social. So applying the standard naming process illustrates the issues we might have with some of these well-known standard data terms. So I was called in to arbitrate a major discussion between a business person and their data management person, who wanted to name a very common data element, a person, financial institution, credit authorization identifier. They said, nope, that's the real true name of this thing, which is usually known as a credit card number. So I did interview a person. I called up the Social Security agency, and I interviewed the person, told them what I was doing, and they said, well, it's an identifier, and it's a unique identifier. You're not ever supposed to have duplicates. It's a unique identifier of a person. It can be used for multiple purposes in the United States. So it's a United States multi-purpose person unique identifier. Now, would you ever call it that? Why or why not? Because nobody would know what you were talking about. So what would you name it? You would keep its name as Social Security number. And how would you abbreviate it? Well, there's a very common abbreviation for Social Security number, and it's SSN. And you would use it. And what about some of these blue words? You would probably want to enter them as key words about this data element named Social Security number. Because if I want to do a query and say, give me all the places or all of the data that identifies a person, I want Social Security number to come up. So let's make sure that it does, but let's not name it this so nobody knows what you're talking about. Because a procedure facilitates thinking. It is not a substitute for thinking. If you can ask 10 people out in the street what a Social Security number is, and at least 8 of them know, you're probably pretty safe. So let's just review the basics of describing and naming. So we're going to focus on the what, not who, where, when, how, and why. You're going to describe things first, get to the nut of what it is, then name it from the description. Be disciplined, follow the procedure, first, second, and third party review before you decide to create it as a standard data definition for the enterprise. And then how are you going to leverage all that work that you've done? And I went to Webster's dictionary and said, well, what do they say leverage is? And it's something that amplifies your potential. It accelerates your benefit without additional expenditure, which leaves you holding a stronger position and you're able to influence people. So I like the part of accelerating benefit without additional expenditure. So I've documented my critical data elements. What do I do with those and the exploratory results? A really good place to put them is in a data model. So you might have a data modeling tool. These are considered entities. They are things that the company cares about. The big nouns like customer. Customers might be two types. There are persons and there are companies that we deal with. It's the person that's going to have the social security number, but a company has the tax ID. And when you start talking about a customer identifier, you're also going to be looking at the name, address, etc. that goes with it. And your subject areas basically are the common business functions that most companies have. So if I'm going to be talking about customers, they would probably go into the sales data subject area. And enterprise models provide controlled vocabularies and are extremely useful. So we're looking at the things of importance to the business. These become the entities. We're going to look at the attributes of these entities, the identifiers and other descriptors, and then the relationships among these entities are actionable verbs. So a customer places an order. The order is for one or more products. The products are composed of parts, which we get from suppliers. And the customer is supported by an employee of my company who wants to preserve and build the relationship with that customer. So as we know, a single concept can have many expressions. I believe in data models that have subtyping. So if I'm interested in person, there could be 3 kinds of people that I'm interested in. I could be interested further in whether a creator is a contributor, an author, or an inventor, perhaps. And in employees, I might want to differentiate between administrators, and instructors. And you can also have multiple subtyping contexts. You could have a vehicle that is subtyped into passenger vehicles, mass transit, construction. But it's manufactured as a 1 to 4 wheel and more vehicle. So you can classify things more than one way. The fascinating thing to me is once you have defined this in your data model and you turn your data model on its side, you have your business glossary. So here we have customer. We're going to, the customer identifier. Here's the description. Here's who to call about the data issues with it. Here are related names that we called it in the systems and in the business. The customer has a name, and we're going to break that down. Customer address, first line, second line, city, state, whatever. So turning the data model on its side gives you a very nice indented list of important terms. Persons are either creators or customers or employees. Products could be from a sales perspective or a manufacturing perspective. And at the root of all of it, what we're doing is making available the parts of these essential questions. So what are we talking about? And where should we start? You're going to choose CDEs based on business priorities. What is causing pain in the organization, and how can you alleviate that pain? How do we define things so that people can find them? Well, we're going to use a standard description and naming process, and that's going to facilitate that quite well. And then how do we use what we did? Well, let's model that data. Let's just place it even as an entity with a few attributes in one of our subject areas. It will grow over time. And from your model of your data, hopefully either in your data modeling tool or a metadata repository, you're going to be able to generate the business glossary. You've already created the standard data definitions. You don't want to have to retype them into something that you're going to call your business glossary. That only introduces errors. And then how do we continue? You figure out what your next set of priorities are. You get some data modeling support maybe into the function because you're being successful. You're going to connect these standard data definitions with where they are implemented in the various databases, systems, columns, etc., so that you can answer a lot of important queries about how to manage your data. What will it cost us if we want to expand the product number from 9 characters to 13 characters? Where are all the places that I would find it? And then you have a chance of being able to estimate. So our stages of progress are to select, choose your CDEs, define by providing the key metadata, at a minimum, the description and the name of this CDE, and you're going to try to get the greatest return on your investment for the work that you've done. And success should come early and often, because you're going to select based on the priorities of the business. You're going to identify data owners and data stewards. You're going to describe, name, and fill in other key metadata for your critical data elements. And you're going to leverage that work by beginning to grow a data model for the company and generate a business glossary. And then you do it again. As you finish with one set of standards, you have the next flight of the next critical data elements that you're going to work in exactly the same way. And this is how your data governance function grows. This is how it's relevant. This is how you will demonstrate your importance to the enterprise and get the funding that you require to do the job and better and in a more sophisticated way. So this is what I had to share with you today, and I thank you so much for attending and for your attention. You can feel free to contact me if you want to know more about how to build the corporate vocabulary, how to model your data, how to choose your critical data elements. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And I just thank you so very much for your presence here today, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope it's been helpful to you as well. And I have tried to leave enough time that we have time for some of the questions. So I can turn it back over to you, Mike, I think, to go into that.
Leave that one up, Barbara, because that's, people will be busy copying it down and things. I think that was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. We do indeed have some questions for you, and I shall begin with, as Julie Andrews would say at the very beginning. So we'll take the first question. How do you differentiate what are the CDEs in analytical solutions when only data error can impact the accuracy, trustworthiness of the reports?
How do you differentiate what are the in analytical solutions when only data error can impact the accuracy? Yes. So in an analytical solution, you know, is there something that is causing pain in the organization because the data is returning clearly different results based upon how the question is being asked when it shouldn't? Let's say that one. So there was an example that I had from an oil drilling company, and the CEO went around the room and he asks each person, the head of, you know, excavation, how many oil wells do we have? And he says 100. Next person, how many oil wells do we have? He says 52. The next person, how many oil wells do we have? And the different numbers came up. So what is it about that formula that is giving different answers for basically the same question? And I think the realization that you are getting incorrect analytical answers is absolutely an area to point to say we have a data problem here. Who cares about these answers? Find a sponsor and find out, dig in, why are we getting different answers, and the critical data elements in this case, because marketing, drilling, whatever the various functions of the company all defined what an oil well was differently. So focusing on the standard for what is this thing we care about, how do we count them, is at the root of that kind of problem. I hope that gives you some answer.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to go straight on with the next one. So, and this is interesting because it's the basis of what we're talking about. Is, do you make a difference between information, data, and attribute? So when you're working to identify a CDE, you mention important data and thereafter important attributes.
Yep.
Do you sort of do that, and when you're differentiating between data and information?
Well, my definition of the two is data is simply a fact. 42, that's a piece of data. I don't know what it is until I see the descriptors about that thing. You know, what is its name? What is its description? But information is data usually taken in context that changes the knowledge base of the recipient. So if I learn that 42 is a count of the number of industrial accidents I had last month in this particular facility, when all the other facilities it's below the number 5, I have now got information that changes my knowledge base, and I'm going to go and look in that direction to find out what is going on in that particular place. So data are just facts, and information combines them usually in a particular context to change the knowledge base of the recipient. And the data that makes up that measurement is what would be critical to make sure is standardized. And in this case, from a business perspective, why is this plant having so many accidents? So that's how I define the difference.
So, okay, excellent. So next one, is there a place in a business glossary for where the data came from, which system, what transformations have been applied, etc.?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
So in the business glossary,
Yeah.
is there a sort of, do you feel that there is a place that records, where the data has come from, which system it came from, which,
Yeah.
and what transformations have been applied to it?
Right. Well, there are, several different ways to do that kind of thing. The data model I showed of a metadata repository, be it one that is a separate metadata repository or that sits underneath your extract, transform, and load tool, or sits underneath your data model, or whether the metadata coming from your data model feeds the repository. The ETL tool feeds the metadata into the repository. And there, when those things get connected, have data lineage that says all the way from, I have this business term and I want to see where it is being extracted from. That's metadata from the ETL tool. And I want to see how it has been mangled and strangled on its way to, say, a data warehouse. And I want to see where this end data shows up on reports. Your BI tools can feed the metadata as well. So if your tools are saving the metadata about what they do and are integrated into a metadata repository that may be part of one of the tools or maybe separate, usually something more comprehensive than just one tool, you can connect all that metadata and basically you're doing queries that are very meaningful for the business as well as for IT. And we did this in a company I was working with a long time ago now, and it was a brokerage company, and there was a piece of information that was being put on the broker's portal that the business said, wait a minute, this is wrong. And they shut down the portal. And because we had information, the metadata about where the data was and how it was being transformed, and we could get that information by querying the metadatabase and getting an answer in less than a day, rather than sending, 50 consultants off to come up with the wrong answer. It was really easy for the ETL person and the business person to sit together. And as they looked at the transformation logic, they said, that calculation is wrong. They fixed the calculation, recompiled the ETL tools. The right information was now being pumped out to the broker portal, and they were up and back in business the next day. So that's the power of, you'll see a lot of tools will do extracts to feed, metadata repositories that are, out there in the industry. And that's the power that you get. It's a very powerful query tool about how things are being used, where they come from, how they've been transformed, what does this column on this report mean, and have access to all the metadata all the way back to its description and its business and abbreviated name.
Wow, great answer, great answer. Two quick questions, I hope, and then we'll ask Robert to just sort of talk about where people can find this as a recording and the slides. So if a business glossary already exists, now lots of people are doing a data governance initiative for the umpteenth time, or right. they've acquired a company that has a data glossary, and they're just sort of, the parent company or the junior company is trying to establish data governance to match that. Do you see it as a stumbling block or an aid, particularly because it usually only represents a part of the business.
Right. And I guess the answer to that question, is it a stumbling block or an aid? I would probably say yes. It can be both. Hopefully it is a subset or a part of that larger corporate effort. There should be communication that's established between the two parts of the business, and the larger corporate entity will probably gain a lot of information about business terms from understanding what it means to this division in the company. And on the other side, the division will look to the corporate standard and said, oh, they already have a list of valid values for this particular term. We're just going to use them. We don't need to invent our own. So it's a give and take back and forth, and you have to look at what are the ramifications of going with the one standard versus the other. Like if you come up with a situation that I described, like the employees in the Puerto Rican facility of digital, they didn't want to have a 6-digit badge number. There was some prestige associated with having a lower badge number. So they invented their own. They had local badge numbers and they were 3 characters. So that is good to know, that you're actually not talking about the same thing at the corporate level and the division level, and to make adjustments so that errors are not made when all of a sudden an employee from a small facility has the exact same employee identifier as the 10th person that was hired into the company.
Splendid, thank you. I think that's got it. The last one is, and I'll paraphrase from Tarek, is that some organizations shy away from the term data ownership.
Data what?
Ownership.
Oh, okay, yep.
You know, how do we attack this problem when that exists?
I agree, and I think data owner is not a great term, because, well, I mean, just think about it. Do they really own the data? If they leave the company, do they get to take it with them? You know, and the answer is no. The data belongs to the corporate entity or the enterprise. So the term we used back at Digital was that there was a data controller. They didn't own the data, but they controlled the definition and the rules around how that data was going to be used. So we used the term data controller, because data owner is kind of a misnomer. But then when I was working, I found most people wanted to say you're the data owner. But you just have to make it clear that they don't own the data. They own the definition and rules about the data. They have the say as to how does this fit into our data model. And why is a person in manufacturing trying to have a different definition of a customer than the person in sales, the VP of sales, who signs off and owns the definition of what a customer is? So you can choose a different term. You know, we use data controller. There needs to be somebody who has fiduciary responsibility with the company, who, you know, can put their hand up and say, I own how this data is going to be used in our company. And, you know, I've explained it, it's modeled correctly, it's described correctly, it's named correctly, and this is the standard that we want to have go forward. So you need a person in that role. And they're usually, you know, VPs of certain functions, because they need to have a fiduciary responsibility for the data. Does that make sense?
It makes eminent sense. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Barbara, for not only agreeing to spend the hour with us, but taking the extra 10 minutes to wade through some of those questions I personally enjoyed what you presented very much. I thought it was right on the nail on the subject, and was a would have been should have been a great sort of aid memoir for people, and I know that that's how people are sort of viewing it. There are lots of complimentary comments, even in the questions panel, many more than we would normally get. So I think you've definitely hit the mark there. So thank you very much indeed. That has been an excellent presentation, well received. Robert, if you're still there, can you just give a quick sort of 10 seconds on where people find the data?
Yeah, and again, I'll echo that sentiment, Barbara. Great presentation. We will be posting the video up onto the ISCDO website under our videos, so www.iscdo.org website, and we'll also send out an email to everyone pointing them to this link. And finally, anyone that has said they want a copy of the PDF, you will get a copy. Barbara will send it to me, and we'll send out those individuals and copy Barbara on that. And again, Michael, thanks very much indeed for your assistance and Barbara's excellent presentation here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, and have a pleasant afternoon or evening, depending on where you all are. Thank you.